All right, people. Today's video is going to be the LA Lakers versus the New York Knicks. Now, this is going to be one of those videos that we talk about. It's going to be back-to-back NBA videos, and let's get into it. Now, Shaquille O'Neal and Patrick Ewing are two of one of the biggest legends of the NBA. We have Shaquille O'Neal, who got drafted in the 1992. Hold on, people. Every time I do a YouTube video, hold on, people. Like I was saying, we have Shaquille O'Neal. I apologize for that. We have Shaquille O'Neal, who got drafted in the 1992 NBA draft, selected #1 pick overall by the Orlando Magic. And then we have Patrick Ewing, who was picked #1 of the 1995 NBA draft, or should I say 1984, by the New York Knicks. Now, Shaquille O'Neal got drafted by the Orlando Magic, and he stood at 7'1" or 7'2", 300 pounds, and the man was a force of nature. The man was bigger, the man was stronger, and the man was powerful. And he won the Orlando Magic a lot of basketball games. They won basketball games. They made the playoffs. They won season games. They won playoff series. And there was one time where Shaq scored 40 points, 20 blocks, 20 rebounds, and 40 points. But Shaq had one major problem. Shaq could not make free throws. And I think we all know that in his whole entire career, he struggled with free throw production. He would get fouled by 2 guys, 3 guys. Hell, there was one game where Shaq got fouled by 4 guys. And Shaq like, damn. And then, of course, by this time period, Shaq had done something that only a few players have ever done. Is that in 5 or 6 NBA seasons, he reached the NBA Finals as the leader of the team. Of course, there were some controversial on and off the basketball court with him doing movies, television shows, making rap albums. But the controversial I'm talking about is he got into it with a young up-and-coming star called Penny Hardaway, who believed he was the star of the basketball team. And that when Shaq was injured in the 1993-1994 NBA season, he had to carry the load. And when Shaq returned, they reached the NBA playoffs. They managed to knock off the Detroit Pistons, I think, in the first round. Second round, they took out a Miami Heat's basketball team, which was a challenge. And in the third round, they had to go up against the New York Knicks. And that was a rivalry. And boy, did you see Shaq and Patrick come face to face, eye to eye, man to man in that matchup. These were 2 big men that were going to come at each other. Patrick Ewing would slam dunk the ball. Shaq come back with a slam dunk. Like, you saw Shaq slam dunk the basketball 10 times in that game. Patrick Ewing slammed the basketball 10 times in that game. And no matter what Shaq did, Patrick would be able to match it. But ultimately, the Orlando Magic were so oppressive, they would knock off. They would lose to the New York Knicks in 6 games. Like, it actually took 6 games, and all Shaq needed was to do was score 38 points or 40 points again, and they would win and force a Game 7. But unfortunately, the New York Knicks won the Eastern Conference semifinals and went to the NBA Finals in '94. And lost to the Houston Rockets in the NBA Finals of 1994. While in 1995, they would have a rematch of the Eastern Conference semifinals. And this time, the Orlando Magic were prepared to knock off the Houston Rockets. But instead, they too would fall victim and would lose in the NBA Finals as Shaq went up against a Keem Dream Olajuwon, and Shaq lost in the NBA Finals. I mean, they won the first game, surprisingly. They managed to win Game 2, but they lost Game 3 and 4. They bounced back in Game 5, but they would ultimately lose Game 6. And once the series was over, this showed that Shaq would one day return back to the NBA Finals. After playing for this organization, Shaq thought it was time for a change to make the jump to LA. And he went to Los Angeles. And that's when the legend of Shaquille O'Neal really began. Once the Magics were not able to make it back to the NBA Finals after that, Shaq did what any player would do. Shaq went and dominated. You know, you had Shaq, you had Kobe Bryant, Rick Fox, Derek Fisher, Brian Shaw. You had Tyronn Lue. You had all of these players on this one team, and they were the Lakers. And they would struggle for a while. At one point, Dennis Rodman was on this team. It was actually funny and hilarious. But they struggled for a while. They would get eliminated by the Portland Trail Blazers, the Utah Jazz, the Phoenix Suns, the Houston Rockets. All these teams would beat them in the playoffs for 4 years. And then finally in 2000, it just happened. Shaq and Kobe won a total of 40 basketball games. They won 40 games. They went on a 40-game winning streak or something like that. If not 40 games, then they went on a 30-game winning streak and won all these games. All of a sudden, they had the best record in the West. They made it to the NBA playoffs in the year 2000. First round, they did away with San Antonio. I think either I take that back. They went up against the Sacramento Kings in the first round, took them out, 5 games. Second round, went up against a Phoenix Suns team, took them out. Third round, took out San Antonio and went back to the NBA Finals for the first time in their franchise and went up against Reggie Miller and the Indiana Pacers. And you could tell that this team had no answer for Shaq. No matter what they did to the Lakers, they could not stop Shaquille O'Neal. The guy would do whatever he wanted on the court. I remember in Game 1 and Game 2, the Lakers dominated that game. I mean, no matter how many points Reggie Miller put up, Reggie Miller's center could not stop Shaq. They couldn't. And then, of course, we get to 2001. We all know what happened in 2001. They knocked out the 76ers in 5 games. And then they go to 2003 NBA's Finals. And they knock out Jason Kidd and the New Jersey Nets. And Shaq had won 3 NBA championships. Now, people always want to talk about if it weren't for Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant would not have 5 NBA championships. Now, Shaq is the reason why they won 3 championships because no one could stop this center. No one could stop this big man. They found it difficult to stop him. But what we do know is Shaq did have injuries during that time period. Finally, they lose to the Detroit Pistons in the 2004 NBA Finals. This Laker dynasty could have won 4 championships, but Shaq was injured. Kobe Bryant wanted to be the star. Gary Payton was healthy. Karl Malone was injured. And Rick Fox and Derek Fisher and Brian Shaw were getting older, and Robert Horry hadn't been the same player that he was back then. So this team was hurt. And then finally, Shaq gets traded to the Miami Heat, where Shaq guaranteed that in 2006, that Miami Heat would win a championship. And Shaq went on and won a title and won 4 NBA championships. When Shaq was with the Orlando Magic, and when he left the Orlando Magic, Shaq was 26, going on 27. And when Shaq was with the Lakers and they was winning those championships, Shaq was about 31 years old. And by the time Shaq and Kobe couldn't see eye to eye, Shaq was now 34. And when he was with the Miami Heat, Shaq was like 35, 36 when he won that championship with the Miami Heat. Then he got injured. And after 2 or 3 years of playing with the Heat, left and found himself with the Phoenix Suns. And I don't know why Shaq chose that team, but it didn't do no good. And then Shaq found himself traded to Cleveland, which sounded nice, but at this point he was just on the tail end of his career. Then he found himself playing with the Boston Celtics. And again, at the towards end of his career. And after winning 4 championships and gone to like 5 or 6 NBA finals and won 4 NBA MVPs, 2 All-Star MVPs, and pretty much being the big man that he is, Shaq had retired his jerseys in LA and then another in Orlando, or soon will do it, and then it has been inducted into the NBA Hall of Fame, or soon will be. And of course, we all know Shaq because at that time he was doing movies, television shows. Now he's an NBA broadcast commentator for TNT. So things have looked good for Shaq on and off the basketball court. Now we all know that he likes to, mess with multiple women, but who don't these days? I mean, the Shaq Diesel was a player, so yeah, he go on player Shaq. But injuries. A lot of people felt that the injuries ruined Shaq's second half of his career. Whether in the first half he was great, the second half of his NBA career wasn't so great. And I think we all can agree that Shaq's first 10 years in the NBA, he was great. And then the rest of his career, he just fall apart our very eyes. He weren't exactly the Shaquille O'Neal of the Orlando Magics. He wasn't the Superman Shaq of the Lakers. He wasn't the Miami Shaquille O'Neal. Towards the end, he was just Shaq. And I think a lot of us were disappointed that here's this great big man, our very eyes. And when he gets to teams like the Phoenix Suns, Cleveland, and the Celtics, he's down the towards end of his career because of all the knee injuries. All the injuries just wore Shaq out. Played 17 years in the NBA, and people always scratch their head that if he could have stayed healthy the second half of his career, there's no telling how many titles he really could have won. There's always that could have actually been for Shaq. Now, we look at another big man, and that is Patrick Ewing. 7'1", 260 pounds, a force of nature, a freak of nature, of devastation. Got drafted in the 1984 NBA draft. Selected number 1 pick of the New York Knicks. Now, we all know this organization has won only 2 championships in their whole entire history franchise of the New York Knicks. Won a championship in 1970 and again in 1973. Now, the championships that the Indiana Pacers won were in the same year, but they weren't in the NBA yet until the 70s. So the Indiana Pacers actually only won one NBA title, if anything, and the other 2 are discredited because they weren't even a part of the NBA in the early 50s and 60s until the mid 70s, early 80s. That's when Indiana, became an NBA team, and they discredit the other 2 championships because the Knicks had already won 2 NBA championships. And we already know the Los Angeles Lakers got 16 championships. Y'all already know what it is, LA. LA got 16 championships. The Knicks, 2 championships. And Stephen A. Smith be the first one to tell you about New York City Knicks. Now, when Patrick got to this team, he already was a champion. He already gone to 3 championships in college basketball. Now, he won 3 championships when he played in high school basketball. He was a McDonald All-American. And then he goes to college, to Georgetown University, and he wins 3 championships in college basketball. Could have won 4 if they didn't lose to Villanova, but he won 2 or 3 college basketball championship titles. Gets drafted in the NBA, goes to the New York Knicks, and immediately improves their defense. They run their whole entire offense through Patrick Ewing. Every basketball game, the guy's got 20 blocks, 20 rebounds, and scores anywhere between 20 to 30 points a game. And if it's a great game, scores 35 to 40 points a game. Patrick Ewing was Dwight Howard before there was Dwight Howard. Patrick Ewing was Amir Stoudemire before there was Amir Stoudemire. Patrick Ewing was DeAndre Jordan before there was DeAndre Jordan. He was that physical under the basket. And Patrick had a lot of rivalries. he would get into it with players like Reggie Miller. He'd get into it with the great Michael Jordan. Remember that beautiful dunk on Patrick and kick Patrick right in the face. And Patrick was ready to knock the crap out of Michael Jordan. Got into it with Shaquille O'Neal. Got into it with Alonzo Moore. I mean, he get into it with a lot of players. And he was not afraid of you. I mean, Patrick would roll up in your face and give you the look what it be like. I mean, Patrick was a badass on that court. I mean, it didn't matter to him if he was in 4 quarters or in overtime. He gets you. He only been thrown out of an NBA game like maybe once or twice his whole career. But he was in his prime in New York City. And during those games against the Chicago Bulls, the Indiana Pacers, the Heats, the Orlando Magics, those are the games of legends. One of his best basketball game was against the San Antonio Spurs in the 1994-1995 NBA season, when they most definitely had the game in control until he went down with a knee injury. Hold on. Apologize for that. I don't know what's with these idiots calling this morning, but I don't like when people call when I'm doing a video on presentation. So rude, so disrespectful, and then you guys get interrupted and it takes away from the video and presentation. Hate when they do that. Until Patrick Ewing go down with a knee injury. And then we get to the 1994 NBA Finals, where the New York Knicks in the first round knock out the Miami Heat. Second round, knock out Reggie Miller and the Indiana Pacers in 7 games. Devastating fashion. Has Reggie Miller crying his ass off. Third round, take out Shaquille O'Neal and the Orlando Magics. Goes all the way to the finals and loses in 5 games to the Houston Rockets. I mean, it was so sad that they only won 1 game against the Houston Rockets. I mean, some might say they won 2 games, so the series ended either in 5 or in 6 games. They lose in the 1994 NBA Finals. And in that series, Patrick Ewing was injured in that series. I think either in Game 3 or in Game 4, Patrick Ewing had tore his Achilles tendons. And I'm shaking my head like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. You win the first round, the second round, the third round, and you lose in the NBA Finals. So we get to the 1995 NBA playoffs, and he loses to the Orlando Magics in an Eastern Conference semifinals rematch. Again, Patrick Ewing goes down with a knee injury 2 years in a row. Nobody thinks about his injury prone. We get to 1996, and we already know what it is. He misses all of the 1996 NBA season. Comes back for 97. He's healthy in 1997, but the coach get fired, and they trade 3 of their best players away, which was stupid for the Knicks organization to do in the first place. Then we get to the 1998-1999 NBA season. Now in 98, they go against the Pacers. They beat the Pacers, but who do they lose to in the second round? Michael Jordan and those Chicago Bulls. And when we get to the 1999 NBA playoffs, Michael Jordan's retired, and they win the first round, they win the second round, they win the third round, and they go back to the NBA Finals. So you would think that, okay, finally after almost 10 years later in the NBA, Patrick's got to at least win 1 title, at least 1 championship. Nope. Loses in 5 to 6 games to a young Tim Duncan and a Sam Elliott and a San Antonio Spurs team. In 10 years, he goes to the NBA Finals twice in his basketball career. And then we see him get traded to the Supersonics with Sean Kemp. Now, at this point, he was towards the end of his prime, but it didn't help because Sean Kemp wasn't the same player. Patrick Ewing went down with an injury in the middle of the season, and this team was just falling apart. And Gary Payton was frustrated because you had two big men, and they were both injury prone. So that didn't help the Seattle Supersonics back then. And then they traded him to the Orlando Magics. And at this point, he was a shell of himself. I mean, Patrick was just not the Patrick Ewing that we expect. We saw small little flashes of him when Tracy McGrady got onto the team. But that didn't help Tracy McGrady either. And then he ended up retiring after that because, he had a long career that lasted 15, 16 years. And it's sad when you think about a guy that plays that many years, only goes to the finals twice, loses twice. He loses to Michael Jordan. He never gets a chance. Like, to me, if he had they not traded away three of their best players and fired a coach in 98, who knows what could have happened for the Knicks. 99, we thought it was going to be their year, but they lose to San Antonio. And we could see how disappointing this was for Patrick. And now we got to ask that question, who is the better big man? Now, this one's a tough one to call because both guys got hurt towards the second half of their careers. Shaq managed to win 4 championships, could have won 6. Patrick could have at least won one championship, but problem was the last 7 years of his NBA career, he was injury prone. So I would probably say it should be a tie, but I know people are going to want me to give them a definitive, clear winner. I'm going to go with Shaquille O'Neal. Now, I know this might be a debate that might go back and forth. Until next time, in the next video, it will be the legendary Larry Bird versus Steve Nash.